The 8-year-old did not know she had just said the one thing that 9 years of careful silence had depended on no one ever saying. Nora Hargrove stood in the glass-walled lobby of the Meridian Group's headquarters, her backpack still on, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished concrete floor, and pointed at the display case beside the reception desk. Inside the case, mounted on a velvet board beside photographs of completed projects and framed commendations, sat a single object, brass, old. A drafting compass, its legs folded, its surface worn to a soft gold at the points where hands had held it for years. Nora looked at the woman standing beside her, the tall one in the gray blazer who had walked through the lobby doors at exactly the same moment she had, and who had stopped to hold the door open with the automatic courtesy of someone who did not think about it, and said, in the easy way of children who have not yet learned that some observations should stay internal, "That's my dad's compass." The woman, Catherine Voss, looked at the display case. Then she looked at the child. Then she looked at the compass again. Her face did not change, but something behind it did, and anyone who had spent time watching Catherine Voss work, her board members, her senior staff, the analysts who called her precise to mean something more like untouchable, would have recognized the shift. A stillness that was not calm, the kind that meant something had just become very complicated. "What's your name?" Catherine said. "Nora," the girl said, "Nora Hargrove." The lobby was quiet except for the sound of the elevator bank and the distant murmur of the city outside. Catherine Voss stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said quietly, "Is your father here?" Thomas Hargrove had been awake since 5:30. He was 47 years old, and he had the particular early rising habit of a man who had learned, years ago, that the hours before 6 were the only ones that belonged entirely to him. He made coffee in the French press that Nora had given him last Father's Day, the one with the small chip on the lid that she had not mentioned, and he had pretended not to notice. He drank it standing at the kitchen window of the apartment on the 4th floor of a building in Eastfield, which was a neighborhood that had good bones and not much else. From the window, on clear mornings, he could see the upper floors of the Meridian Tower, under construction on the other side of the river. 41 stories, steel and glass, built on a foundation design that he had first sketched on a paper napkin in a diner on Clement Street 9 years ago, when the project was still a proposal and he was still the kind of engineer who believed that the work was the thing that mattered. He did not look at the tower this morning. He looked at the coffee and then at his phone, and then at the list on the refrigerator that Nora had written in her careful printing, "Bus Thursday. Library book due Friday. Dad, buy more oatmeal." He bought the oatmeal. He walked Nora to the bus stop at 7:15. She was in the middle of explaining a disagreement she'd had with her best friend over the correct way to fold a paper crane, which had escalated across 3 days and 2 recesses into a matter of genuine principle. Thomas listened. He asked questions. He waited until he saw her climb the steps of the bus and turned to wave at him from the window, and then he walked the 6 blocks to the transit station and took the train downtown. He was consulting now. That was the word for it. He had been consulting for 4 years, which meant he worked alone, took contracts when they were offered, and kept his name off the big projects in the way that a man keeps his name off things when he has good reasons not to be found. His current contract was small. A seismic assessment on a mid-rise in the Garland district. 3 weeks of work, maybe 4. Enough. He did not think about the Meridian Tower. He had made a decision 11 months ago to stop thinking about it. Catherine Voss had been running the Meridian Group for 4 years. She was 36, which meant that when she had taken the position, she had been 32, which meant that the profile in the business press had described her as either remarkable or anomalous, depending on the outlet's editorial posture. She did not read the profiles. She had spent her career building things, first as a project manager, then as an operations director, then as the person that struggling firms called, when they needed someone who could look at a mess without blinking and identify exactly where it had started. She was good at that. She was good at the kind of clarity that required you to remove your own preferences from the equation. The Meridian Group had been in trouble when she arrived. Not visibly from the outside, it was a successful mid-size construction conglomerate with a strong regional presence and a solid portfolio. But from the inside, if you knew where to look, there were things that did not add up, contracts that should not have been won, a foundation patent that had been registered in a way that made sense, only if you did not look too closely at the timing. A drafting compass in a display case in the lobby with a brass plate beneath it that read Meridian Group. Founding Vision, R. Calloway. She had not known, when she took the job, to look at the compass. She had been told by the board that Richard Calloway, who had retired 6 years ago and whose son, Derek, now held a senior advisory role, had built the firm on a structural foundation methodology that was genuinely unlike anything else in the regional market. Elegant, precise, particularly suited to soft soil conditions near river basins, which described most of the city's development zones. She had assumed it was Richard's. She had not yet had reason to wonder whose it actually was. Nora did not go home with anyone from school that afternoon. The bus had a mechanical issue, something with the door mechanism, and the driver had pulled over 3 stops early and called the district transportation office. Parents were notified. Nora, who had been sitting in the 3rd row with her library book, got off the bus with the other 8 children and stood on the corner of Westfield and Canal, while the afternoon sorted itself out. She was not alarmed. Nora Hargrove had a quality that her teachers described, in their careful, professional language, as unusually self-sufficient, and which Thomas recognized as something she had built for herself in the years after her mother died, when she had understood, in the way that children understand large things, incompletely but accurately, that her father was carrying something very heavy, and she should try not to add to it. She knew his office number. She called it. He did not answer, which meant he was in an assessment and could not have his phone. She called her aunt, who lived in the suburb of Hendale and was 45 minutes away. Her aunt said she was coming, and to wait and to stay on the sidewalk. Nora waited for 11 minutes. Then she looked at the transit map on the corner pole, and she saw that the Meridian Group building, which she had passed with her father once, on a Saturday, and which he had looked at in the way he sometimes looked at things he did not say anything about, was 4 blocks north. She knew her father's afternoon schedule. She knew he finished the Garland District assessment by 2. She knew that sometimes, after assessments, he walked by the river. She reasoned with the particular logic of an 8-year-old who had grown up watching a thoughtful man think, that he might have walked this way. She also, if she was honest, wanted to see the building up close. She texted her aunt, going to Meridian Building, 4 blocks north. We'll wait in lobby. She walked north. She did not consider that this plan had any meaningful flaw. She was 8, and the logic seemed sound, and the day was clear, and she had her library book. Catherine Voss did not go back to her scheduled 2:30 call. She told her assistant she needed 20 minutes. She went to her office, closed the door, and opened the cabinet behind her desk where she kept the oldest files, the ones that predated her tenure, the ones the board had given her when she took the position as orientation material, which she had read carefully, and then filed and not returned to since. She found what she was looking for on page 31 of the original incorporation documentation. The Meridian Soft Foundation System, the methodology that had won the firm its first major contracts, that had been patented under Richard Calloway's name in the spring 16 years ago, had been developed, according to the internal project notes in the file, by a structural engineering consultant brought in for the prototype phase. The consultant's name was listed once, in a footnote, as T. Hargrove, no first name, no other reference. She turned pages. She found the patent application. The listed inventor was Richard Callaway. She found the consulting agreement. It contained a clause, buried in the indemnification section, that assigned intellectual property rights to the client for any work product created during the engagement. Standard language, the kind that a 20-something engineer, still building his career, might have signed without fully understanding what he was giving away. She put the file down. She thought about the compass in the lobby case. Brass, old, the initials, TH, worn faint on the inner curve of the handle. She had seen them once, years ago, when she had paused during a facilities tour and had assumed they referred to some historical figure whose connection to the firm had never been explained to her. She thought about an 8-year-old girl saying, with complete certainty, "That's my dad's compass." She picked up her phone. She called Derek Callaway. She said, "I need to understand the provenance of the compass in the lobby display. Who brought it in, and when and where it came from originally?" There was a pause. Derek Callaway was 51 and had his father's habit of answering questions with a 3-beat silence that was meant to communicate unruffled authority. "Why?" he said. "Because I'm asking," Catherine said. Another pause. "My father brought it in when the firm opened. It was his." "I'd like to see the original documentation that supports that," Catherine said, "before end of day." She hung up. She sat for a while without calling anyone else. Then she went back to the lobby. The child was still there, sitting in one of the reception chairs, with her library book open on her knees, feet not quite reaching the floor. She had accepted a paper cup of water from the front desk receptionist and was reading with the focused composure of someone who read the way other people breathed. Catherine sat down in the chair beside her. "Is your father on his way?" she said. Nora looked up. "My aunt is coming. My dad doesn't have his phone on right now." "How do you know about the compass?" Catherine asked. She kept her voice the way she kept most things, level, direct, without extra weight. Nora closed the book on her finger. "It was my mom's," she said. "She gave it to my dad when they got married. It was her grandfather's. My dad uses it for drawing, for his work drawings. He keeps it in his desk at home. But he told me once that before I was born, someone took it, and he never got it back." She said this with the factual tone of someone reporting a thing that had happened before they were old enough to have opinions about it, which was somehow worse than if she had said it with visible distress. "What's your father's full name?" Catherine said. "Thomas Hargrove," Nora said. "He's a structural engineer." She paused. "He's really good at it. He says the best structures are the ones that look like they weren't hard to build." Catherine looked at the display case from across the lobby. She said more to herself than to the child. "Yes, I imagine they do." Thomas arrived at 17 minutes past 3. He came through the main doors at a pace that was not quite running, but was the walk of a man who had gotten a text from his daughter saying, "Meridian Building, Lobby. Am fine, aunt coming," and had spent the transit ride trying to make those words into a complete picture. He saw Nora first. The specific physical relief of seeing your child in a chair, unharmed, reading. He crossed the lobby quickly and crouched beside the chair and put a hand on her shoulder, and she looked up from her book with the slightly affronted expression of someone who had been managing perfectly well. "I texted you," she said. "My phone was off," he said. "I know. Are you?" "I'm fine." She held up the book. "I'm at the good part." He straightened, and then he saw the display case. He had not meant to look at it. He had not been in this building before. He had passed it on streets, had seen photographs in trade publications, had once sat in a parking structure half a mile away and looked at its eastern face for 20 minutes before driving home. But he had not walked through its doors. He had made that choice deliberately 11 months ago, when Matthew Chen, who was his attorney and had been his college roommate, had told him that the statute of limitations on a civil claim was still open, but that without additional documentation, they did not have enough to build on. He had looked at the compass in the display case from 30 feet away, and it had taken him approximately 2 seconds to understand what he was seeing. He was 47 years old, and he had spent the last 9 years moving forward in the particular way of people who do not have the option of stopping. He had raised Nora. He had rebuilt his career from a set of referrals and a reputation that had survived. The part where his name was quietly removed from the project that had made other people's names. He had not thought about the compass in the display case because thinking about it had no useful function. But he was looking at it now. Mr. Hargrove. He turned. The woman in the gray blazer was standing 6 feet away. She was younger than he'd expected, mid-30s, he guessed, with the particular posture of someone who was used to being the most focused person in the room. She held a folder in one hand. "I'm Catherine Voss," she said. "I run the Meridian Group." She paused. "I think we need to talk." Thomas Hargrove looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Nora, who had set her book down and was watching them both with the alert expression she got. When she understood that something was happening that was larger than the visible pieces. "Give me a minute," he said to Catherine Voss. He crouched beside Nora again. "Your aunt is coming?" 14 minutes, she texted, Nora said. "Can you wait here? Right here in this chair?" Nora looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, reading something below the surface of his words. "Are you okay, Dad?" "Yes," he said. "I need to go have a conversation. I'll be right over there." He pointed to a seating area at the far edge of the lobby, visible from the reception desk. "You can see me the whole time." Nora considered this. "Okay," she said. She held up the book. "I'm still at the good part anyway." He touched the top of her head once, briefly, and stood. They sat across from each other in the lobby seating area, the folder between them on the low table. Catherine opened it to the page she had marked. She turned it so he could read it. The consulting agreement, dated 16 years ago. His name, his signature. He recognized the signature the way you recognize something you have been trying not to think about, with the sudden clarity of something you already knew. "The compass in your display case," Thomas said. "Where did Richard Calloway say it came from?" "He didn't document it," Catherine said. "It was placed in the display when the lobby was designed. No provenance on file beyond his statement that it was his." She paused. "Your daughter says it belonged to her mother." "It belonged to my wife's grandfather," Thomas said. "Marcus Webb. He was a civil engineer. The initials on the inside of the handle are his MW. The outer initials are worn now. They were TH. I had them engraved when she gave it to me." Catherine looked at the folder. She turned to a different page. A photographic inventory from the lobby design documentation 9 years old. A close-up of the compass in the case. She slid it across the table. In the photograph, the outer curve of the brass handle was clearly visible, faintly, worn but legible. Thomas looked at the photograph for a long moment. "The Meridian Soft Foundation System," Catherine said. It was not a question, exactly. It was the sentence of someone who had spent the last 90 minutes reading and had arrived somewhere she had not expected to end up. "I developed it over 14 months, Thomas said, beginning in the fall of the year before the patent was filed. I was a consulting engineer. I was 31. My wife Diane was 3 months pregnant with Nora. We needed the contract." He stopped. "I signed a standard IP assignment clause, without fully understanding that Richard Calloway intended to patent the methodology under his own name. By the time I understood what had happened, he had restructured the relationship, introduced a second set of documents with a different signature block, and I could not prove that the first set had been replaced." "A second set of documents," Catherine said. "Yes. Do you have the originals?" "I have my copy of the consulting agreement I signed. I have 14 months of development notes." I have the original sketches, dated and time-stamped on the firm's own project management system, a system I still have login credentials for, as of 4 years ago, because no one thought to revoke them. He paused. I also have the compass, or I did. Richard Calloway took it from my office the day he informed me that the engagement was ending, along with 2 storage drives and a physical project binder. He said they were company property. I did not have an attorney present. He was quiet for a moment. My wife died 8 weeks after that, a blood clot. It was unrelated to any of this, but afterward I was not in a position to fight anything for a significant period of time. Catherine Voss was still. She had the quality of someone who had heard many things across many tables and had learned to receive information without immediate response. But something had shifted in her expression, not sympathy exactly, which would have been easier to dismiss. Something more like precision, the look of someone recalculating. "The project management system," she said. "Is it still accessible?" "I checked 8 months ago," Thomas said. "The archive partition is still live. The firm moved to a new platform 4 years ago and migrated active projects only. The old system is on a legacy server that I believe is in this building's basement infrastructure room." Catherine looked at him steadily. "Why haven't you taken legal action?" Without an attorney who believed I had enough documentation to prevail, I couldn't justify the cost or the exposure. "I have a daughter." He said it plainly, without self-pity. "I made the calculation. I was going to try again this year, when Nora started at the middle school and things were more stable." He paused. "And then your lobby apparently had other plans." Catherine looked across the lobby at Nora, who was back in her chair, library book open, feet swinging. The girl glanced up, registered that she was being looked at, offered a small wave, and returned to reading. Catherine turned back. She opened the folder to a fresh page and placed a pen beside it. "I need the name of your attorney," she said, "and I need you to tell me what's on that archive server." Thomas met Matthew Chen for 40 minutes in a coffee shop 2 blocks away while his sister-in-law collected Nora and took her to dinner. He called Matthew from the lobby, and Matthew arrived in a charcoal suit that meant he had come from another meeting, carrying a messenger bag that had seen better years. "She reached out to you directly," Matthew said. "She opened a folder on the table and turned it toward me," Thomas said. "She is not on the other side of this." Matthew looked at him. They had known each other for 22 years, which meant Matthew could read the difference between Thomas being cautious and Thomas being certain. The archive server. The original development files are on it. Dated, time-stamped, under my login. Every iteration of the foundation methodology, from the first rough parameters through to the final system design. The metadata will show my credentials as the originating user. Thomas wrapped his hands around his coffee. "She's putting a legal hold on the system before end of day." "Derek Calloway will know by morning," Matthew said. "Yes. Are you ready for it to move this fast?" Thomas thought about the compass in the display case. He thought about Diane, who had carried the compass in the front pocket of her field bag for 3 years before she gave it to him, who had said, when she placed it in his hands, that her grandfather had used it to draw the original survey lines for the bridge on Route 9. The old one, the one that had stood for 70 years before the new one went up. And that she wanted Thomas to have it, because she thought the work he did would last that long too. He thought about Nora reading her library book in a lobby chair, completely unconcerned, waiting for things to sort themselves out. "She came here because she was curious," Thomas said. "She's 8. She saw a building and wanted to look at it." He paused. "I have been careful for 9 years. I have waited. I have built a file. I have calculated." He picked up his coffee. "And my daughter walked into a lobby and pointed at a compass and said what she saw." Matthew was quiet. "Yes," Thomas said, "I'm ready." Derek Calloway arrived at the Meridian Group at 8:15 the following morning, with a lawyer and a controlled expression. He walked into Catherine's office and placed a folder on her desk before she could speak. This is a full accounting of the Callaway family's contribution to the founding methodology, he said. My father's design notebooks. Correspondence with the original patent attorney. I understand you've had contact with a former consultant who is making claims. I want to address those claims directly, as a board matter. Catherine did not touch the folder. Good morning, Derek, she said. Sit down. He sat. She turned her monitor toward him. On the screen was the archive server interface, opened under Thomas Hargrove's credentials. The file structure showed 14 months of dated entries. The first entry was timestamped 3 months before the patent application date. The file name was Foundation System, Initial Parameters, T. Hargrove. The metadata on these files cannot be altered retroactively, Catherine said. I had our IT director verify that yesterday afternoon. The server architecture timestamps each entry at creation. She clicked to another window. This is the file my legal team found in the archive. A scan of the original consulting agreement that Thomas Hargrove signed, version 1, which contains a standard IP clause and does not contain the paragraph that appears in version 2. The one in our permanent records, the one that expands the IP assignment to include all derivative methodologies. She paused. Those are different documents, the same signature block, different content. Derek said nothing. There is also, Catherine said, an email chain from the year of the engagement, between your father and the patent attorney. In it, your father refers to the foundation system as, quote, Hargrove's method, and asks what would be needed to file it under a different name given the consulting structure. She closed the laptop. This is not a claim from a disgruntled former contractor, Derek. This is a documented pattern of deliberate misappropriation. Derek Callaway was 61 years old and had the ease of a man who had spent his life believing that the right preparation made problems manageable. The ease was leaving him in real time, the way water leaves a cracked container. Steadily, visibly, not all at once. My father built this company, he said. Your father built this company using a methodology he did not develop, Catherine said. The man who developed it was 31 years old, had just signed a contract because he needed the work, and lost his wife 8 weeks after your father ended the engagement and removed his equipment from the office. She stood. I've already spoken to the board. There's an emergency session at 9. I expect you to attend. She picked up her own folder. And I've asked the city attorney's office to be present, because the forensic document analysis is going to need to go somewhere, and I'd prefer they hear it from us. Thomas was not in the board meeting. He was in the parking structure 3 blocks away with Nora, who had a half day from school and had brought the coloring supplies she kept in her backpack for occasions that required waiting. She was working on an intricate rendering of a horse, in 6 colors, with great methodical care. Matthew called at 11:40. Thomas listened. He asked 2 questions. He said very little else. When he hung up, he sat on the concrete barrier at the edge of the parking level and looked at the skyline, which, on a clear day, showed the upper third of the Meridian Tower, still under construction, still wrapped in its grid of scaffolding on the south face. Did something happen? Nora said, without looking up from the horse. Yes, Thomas said. She added a detail to the horse's mane. Good something or bad something? Thomas thought about that. The board had voted 4-1 to formally acknowledge the intellectual property dispute. Derek Callaway's advisory role had been suspended pending a full legal review. The city attorney's office was opening an inquiry. The patent, filed under Richard Callaway's name 16 years ago and renewed twice since, was being flagged for re-examination. Good, he said, I think mostly good. Nora looked up then. She had Diane's eyes, the particular shade of gray-green that Thomas had stopped being surprised by and had simply accepted as the feature of his daughter that he would never be fully prepared for. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, that thorough look, the one that saw past the surface of whatever he was presenting. "You look like when something is heavy and you put it down," she said. Thomas looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "that's about right." She went back to the horse. Thomas sat with the skyline and the quiet of the parking level and the sounds of his daughter's markers moving across paper, and he let himself be still in it for a while. Catherine found him 6 weeks later, this time by appointment, at the small office on Renner Street where Thomas had been running his consulting practice for 2 years. It was on the second floor of a mixed-use building, above a print shop, with a south-facing window that got good afternoon light. He had a drafting table by that window, a desk, 2 chairs, a framed photograph on the wall of the Route 9 bridge, the old one, taken sometime in the early 1960s. She was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee, which surprised him. "I didn't know how you took it," she said, "so I brought them black." "That's how I take it," he said. She handed him one and sat in the client chair. She looked at the office with the focused attention of someone who was seeing it as a place rather than a meeting room. "The board has completed the preliminary review," she said. "The legal team is prepared to file a formal acknowledgement of the IP claim. We'll be withdrawing the patent and supporting a re-registration under your name." She held the coffee cup in both hands. "Derek has resigned. He's cooperating with the inquiry, which the city attorney describes as genuinely useful, which I take to mean he's given them enough to work with." Thomas nodded. "The board also wants to discuss a financial settlement," Catherine said. 16 years of royalty-eligible usage of the foundation methodology applied to the projects that used it. The number they're working from is significant. She paused. "They'd like your attorney to engage with their counsel, about the structure." "I know," Thomas said. "Matthew has been in contact with them." He looked at the coffee cup. "What are you doing here then, if it's a legal matter?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. Outside, the print shop made its familiar low mechanical sounds. The afternoon light came through the south window at an angle that caught the brass frame on the Route 9 photograph. "There is something I wanted to bring you," she said. She reached into the bag she had set beside the chair and placed an object on the drafting table between them. The compass. Brass, old, the legs folded, the surface worn to its particular soft gold. The initials on the outer handle, TH, were clearly visible in the afternoon light. The inner curve, MW, faint, exactly as Thomas had described to her in the lobby. "It is not the property of the Meridian Group," Catherine said. "It never was. It was removed from your office without your consent. Returning it is the only part of this that doesn't require a legal process." She paused. "I should have done it immediately when I understood. I'm sorry it took 6 weeks." Thomas looked at the compass for a long moment. He reached out and picked it up. The weight of it was exactly as he remembered. Specific, settled, the particular balance of an instrument made to last. He had used it every day for 3 years before it was taken. He had drawn the initial sketches for the foundation system with it. He had used it to show Diane the rough outlines of the method on a Saturday afternoon in their apartment, the 2 of them leaning over the drafting table he'd set up in the second bedroom, the one that was going to be the nursery, before the pregnancy was far enough along to start talking about paint colors. She had said, "I think this is the thing you've been building toward." He had said, "It's not finished yet." She had said, "No, but you can see the shape of it now. That's the part that matters." He held the compass. He set it on the drafting table in front of him. He looked at it for a moment, and then he looked at Catherine Voss, who was watching him with the careful attention of someone who understood that they were in the middle of something that did not require commentary. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. She did not rush to fill the silence. "The board wants to add a line to the company history," she said after a moment, "crediting the development of the foundation methodology to you with the original project date. And one more thing." She paused. I'd like to add a second name, Diane Hargrove. Your wife was the person who helped you refine the field testing parameters. Her notes are in the archive file, her handwriting in the margin notations. She contributed to this, and the record should say so. Thomas was still. I'd like her to be in it, Catherine said, if you're willing. He looked at the photograph of the Route 9 bridge. Diane had taken it on a trip they'd made upstate the summer before Nora was born. She had pulled over on the shoulder and gotten out of the car to take it, because she said a bridge that had stood for 70 years deserved a photograph taken by someone who understood why. He said, "Her name is Diane Webb Hargrove. She was a civil engineer. She liked structures that looked like they had decided to be permanent." Catherine had her phone out. She was writing it down. "I'll make sure the record uses that," she said, the exact phrasing. On a Tuesday evening in October, the official company history page for the Meridian Group was updated. Between the founding date and the first major contract, a new section appeared. It was short. It read, "The Meridian Soft Foundation System, which forms the technical basis for the firm's regional work, was developed by structural engineer Thomas Hargrove over the course of 14 months during the project's formative period. The field parameters were refined in collaboration with civil engineer Diane Webb Hargrove, whose margin notes in the original development archive remain part of the project record. Her contribution is recognized as foundational to the system's final form." Thomas saw it on his laptop on a Tuesday night while Nora was finishing her homework at the kitchen table. He read it twice. He set the laptop aside. He sat at the kitchen table with his daughter and did not say anything for a while. And Nora, who had learned to read the texture of her father's silences, simply moved her worksheet a little to the left to make room. The compass sat on his drafting table by the south-facing window, where he had put it when he brought it home. Nora had asked about it once. She had picked it up carefully, the way she picked up things she understood were important, and said, "Is this the one from the building?" And he had said yes. She had held it for a moment and then set it down exactly where she had found it. She had not asked anything else. She had the quality, which she had gotten from somewhere, he chose not to examine too carefully, of understanding when a thing did not need more words. He had used the compass that week, a small project, a site survey for a school addition in the Westmore district. He had brought it out of habit, or something that was not quite habit. Something more like the deliberate choice to use a thing that was yours, because it was yours, because that fact had been true the whole time, even when it appeared not to be. The school addition would take 8 months to build. It was not a landmark project. It would not appear in a trade publication. It was a set of classrooms on the north side of a school in a neighborhood that needed them. And the foundation had to be right, because the ground in that area was variable and the structure had to last. That was the work. He had always been better at the work than at the politics of the work, at the thing itself, rather than the credit for the thing. Diane had understood this about him and had not tried to change it, only told him once, early in his career, that the work being good was not the same as the work being known to be good, and that he would have to decide which one he was building toward. He had thought about that for a long time. He still thought about it. He looked at Nora, bent over her homework, the specific concentration of a child who takes things seriously. She had her mother's handwriting. She did not know this yet, which meant the moment he told her was still in front of him, and he found, as he had found with other things that were still in front of him, that there was something in that. Outside, the city settled into its evening self. Somewhere across the river, the Meridian Tower stood incomplete in its scaffolding, its south face catching the last of the October light. Nora had started it. She had walked into a lobby because she was curious about a building, and she had looked at a display case, and she had said what she saw, with the full and uncomplicated confidence of someone who did not yet know that there were things you were supposed to not say. She had no idea what she had set in motion. She was 8. She had been at the good part of her library book. But that was what the truth did, sometimes. It did not wait for a deposition or a forensic report, or an attorney in a charcoal suit. Sometimes it walked in through a revolving door in a pair of sneakers with a library book under one arm, pointed one finger at a display case, and said, "That's my dad's." And the room went quiet, and the silence that followed was the kind that does not end the way it began.